Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cycle Podcast. I'm really grateful today. I have Jen with me. She is actually in Kuwait right now, and she's originally from the UK, but I am going to let her tell us all about herself because I'm just getting to know her as well. Jen, why don't you start off by just telling us, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Thank you for coming on.
And thanks, Melissa, to hosting me on your podcast. I think it's just so helpful for all of us endo sufferers to hear everybody's story and to know that we're not alone. I think my story starts in much the same way as everybody else's. I probably started experiencing symptoms from the time my periods first began, so when I was about 14. Very, very painful periods to the point of missing school. You know the story. I remember calling my mum from many sleepovers at friends' houses if it coincided with my period, that I just would be in agony and I would have to leave. Basically, I just couldn't function. So on numerous occasions, my mother took me to the GP in England, and I was told, oh, it's just your period, take paracetamol, by which point, paracetamol just wouldn't touch the pain.
What is
I was
that?
also told to take hub.
Is that a painkiller?
Yes, so just take Panadol, take ibuprofen. It's just your period. It's meant to be normal. It's meant to be painful. That's what I was told.
Right.
That went on, and then I went on the pill when I was 16. And then over the next 2 or 3 years, I would say that the pain just got worse. And obviously the endometriosis was progressing. And when I went back to the GP and told them that if anything, my symptoms were getting worse and not better, I was told that that was a medical impossibility because the pill would fix painful periods.
Oh my goodness.
So
how long ago, how old are you now?
So I'm 37 now.
Okay.
So I've had symptoms for 23 years now.
Okay.
So then when I went to university, from about the age of 19, I then started experiencing bowel issues. I had that looked into. I was told you're not eating sufficiently, you're not eating often enough. So that went on for 2 or 3 years, and I had all kinds of investigations in hospital, and ultimately they said you've got IBS.
Of course. So, really quick, at this point, were you starting to feel sick every day? Because this is a question I always like to ask so people kind of know. In high school, like, it's okay, it's around your period, but there's some other weird stuff. But then, like, as you get to university, it starts to be something doesn't feel right daily. Is that what kind of happened with you as well?
Definitely. And I think for me, the overriding, apart from the pain, was probably the fatigue of just not being able to function like I could see that everybody else was functioning. And I remember my mother on so many occasions just saying, it's not normal to be this tired at your age. It's just not normal. And again, I'd go back to the doctor. I had so many blood tests, and nothing was ever found. And then nothing was investigated any further.
With your painful period, did your mother say like, oh, I had this too, or this isn't normal? Or is it just, this is how it goes for women that have painful periods?
No, she was very good, actually. She could tell from the very beginning that it wasn't normal. She hadn't had, looking back now, I wonder whether she did actually have endometriosis, because she had problems conceiving for many, many years. And then she said that she had bowel issues around her period. So now little bits I'm piecing together that potentially she had it, but she didn't have very painful periods, but she was incredibly sympathetic. And, I just don't think she could have done any more as a mother. She just kept taking me back to the doctors, and they just weren't interested.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. So now you're diagnosed with IBS. What happens after that?
then I qualified as a lawyer in London. And then, so obviously I was working quite long hours. I was working for a city law firm. And then just as I qualified as a lawyer, one day in the office, I just all of a sudden had pelvis in my pelvis. So I was rushed to hospital. It was so bad that I collapsed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't. So I was taken to hospital, and they thought it was that was ruled out. And then they said that they couldn't find anything else. So they said that I had a very severe kidney infection. So I was treated for a kidney infection for about 3 months, but the pain was still there. I was on very, very strong painkillers. And then I went back to the GP and I said, something isn't right. This isn't a kidney infection. I've been on so many different antibiotics. And that was finally the GP referred me to a gynecologist. I hadn't even seen a gynecologist. And so that was when I was 27. So that was 13 years symptoms. So then I went in, they did a few investigations.
You cut out there for a minute, Jen. When you got to the hospital, what did they rule out?
So they ruled out appendicitis.
Got it. Did they look for like ovarian cysts or anything like that? Do you know?
They did do ultrasounds, couldn't see anything.
Okay.
So that's when they said it was a kidney infection. And I went to 2 different hospitals in London and up north, and I was treated for a kidney infection for 3 months. And long story short, it wasn't a kidney infection. When I finally got to see a gynecologist, I had to wait months to see a gynecologist. Fairly swiftly, I was booked in for a laparoscopy.
Did you meet with this gynecologist? You told this gynecologist everything you're going for, and they said, okay, we're going to do this laparoscopy right now. Did anyone say endometriosis? Was there anything, or were they just like, we're going to do this surgery on you because we think you might have endo?
No, there was absolutely no mention of endometriosis. They just said that I had had every test that they could think of, and this was the next stage for them to explore further. So I hadn't even heard of endometriosis by this point.
Right.
So I went in for the laparoscopy, and then when I woke up, they said, you have stage 4 endometriosis. It's very extensive. That's what's causing your pain. So I was luckily a specialist endometriosis, so I did get to see him quite quickly. So that was in the September, and I was booked in for surgery in the November.
Okay, so they just did like an exploratory laparoscopy first, diagnosed you with stage 4, and then you got referred to seeing a specialist.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So then I went in for surgery in the November when I was 27, and I had a 6-hour surgery. He just described it as everything was stuck together. Yeah. Everything was stuck to my pelvis, as if all of my entire and then after that, he said that he had to do it in 2 stages because it was too extensive for him to divide all of the adhesions. So I think at this stage, I didn't have excision. I think it was ablation.
Yeah.
So he did that surgery. Then I was put into menopause state for 6 months. And then I had another surgery after that.
So they put you on medication for the menopause?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Which made me feel very depressed. you didn't really feel many emotions, and it was really tough actually. And it was divided, so you would have an injection once at the beginning, and then after 3 months you would have another injection. And by the second one, I was really debating whether to have the second injection.
Right.
But my surgeon persuaded me. He said there's a really good chance if you have it that it won't grow back. There's an 80% success rate that it won't grow back. So I did it. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of my story.
Yeah. Do you remember
so
what the drug was called? It might be different in the UK than it would be in the States. Like here, it probably would have been Lupron.
Yes, something similar. It's the GnRH agonist. Yeah. So I think it's very similar, to Lupron.
And you did not feel well on that at all, I assume. Like you said, you were depressed, but you probably felt terrible too. And being 27, 28 at this point, like going through menopause.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't. I also.
Did you research endometriosis at this point? Like after you had that 6-hour surgery, did you have an understanding of what it really meant to have endo?
No. I mean, I started to do research, but I mean, when you look back, it was 10 years ago from now. Yeah, and I think, now there is so much out there, which is amazing for people who are being diagnosed. But back then there was really very little, and it was still thought of as being an older woman's disease. A lot of doctors thought that people develop this disease later on in life. So there was really very little information, and I certainly didn't think that once you had surgery and you'd had it removed that it could grow back. I definitely, and I also didn't appreciate that it could cause so much damage to organs. I think, and that's something I wish that I had known earlier.
Do you feel like when you had that first surgery that any of that was explained to you? I mean, he probably, I hate to say it, the doctor probably didn't even have that knowledge at that point.
I mean, definitely not. He's still, I saw my surgeon for about 7 or 8 years. I think at the time he did his very best with the knowledge that he had.
Yes.
I wasn't advised time that I was having surgery and that the doctors were going near my ovaries, that was also having an effect on my ovarian reserve. That's something that I've only found out much later. I did ask at the time whether I should be considering freezing my eggs, but the answer was no, don't worry about it, it will be fine. I was also told by the same surgeon that I should think about getting pregnant and think about doing it quickly. At which point I'd only just met my now husband. It just wasn't the right time. I certainly wasn't going to feel pushed into getting pregnant, and that isn't an answer either to it. But he genuinely thought it was at the time.
Right. Just a lot of misinformation, and I understand exactly where you're coming from, because a lot of my journey was over 10 years ago too, and the information is so much different now, which is great. And there's still not enough information now. So 10 years ago, we really couldn't find out a lot of information. So, okay, so you go through this menopause, you do the second shot. What happens after that?
And then I get about a year of not having too much pain. I was lucky. I'd still get painful periods, but nothing like what I was experiencing before, where I would pass out from the pain, I would be physically sick. So a lot improved after those 2 surgeries. But then I started to get symptoms back, tugging pain. So I went back to my surgeon, still getting symptoms, and the response was, "That's not possible because I cured you." So it went on. It went on for another 6 months, at which point I insisted that I wanted him to at least have a look. And he was saying, "Oh, it could be neuropathic pain. There may not be anything there." So we agreed that he would go and have a look. Anyway, when I come out of surgery, he said, you were right, the endometriosis was back, and we had to, I think that surgery was shorter, it was 2 or 3 hours. But the relief after that surgery of actually hearing that I wasn't mad and that there was something there, I was actually relieved to hear in one way that it was the endometriosis.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I understand that. It's like you almost want, you don't want to think it's in your head, because a lot of times we do think it's in our head and we double guess and question ourselves. And, you know, I talked about this with another podcast yesterday that I did, but I think the jury is still out if it actually comes back or if it's left behind and it regenerates. I don't think anybody knows that answer yet, because I want to know that answer too, because like you, I've had 6 surgeries and every single time I've been full of endometriosis when it's been removed by an excision doctor. So I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me, you know, so that's a big question out there still that I think needs to be answered. So you have another recovery. Now, now you've had 3 surgeries in what, 2 years?
3, yes, exactly.
Wow.
So then I am struggling. I've got, you know, I'm working full time, I'm working long hours. I think a big symptom that just carried on, that never went away, was fatigue, but I just managed, I just learned to live with that, I think. Yeah. And then I get another 2.5 years where the symptoms are starting to build. And then in March 2016, just before I was about to get married, I decided to have a 4th surgery, just because I wanted him to have a look and make sure that the endometriosis wasn't active. And I was also by that point considering my fertility. So I wanted him to check everything. Right. So in March, again, I had it. So that's probably 2.5 years later. And again, there was extensive endometriosis. And also by this stage, I've been going for scans, and they're now saying, we also think you have adenomyosis as well. So that may be causing your painful periods. And obviously, as we know, there's nothing really that they can do to treat that apart from hysterectomy, which
right. And so
is only a cure for adenomyosis and not endometriosis.
Correct. So in these 2 years before this surgery, are your periods still painful every month?
Still painful, but nowhere near as bad as they were.
Right. And
so it did improve slightly.
And with ablation, anyone who's listening or may not know a lot about ablation, it's where they burn off the top, like superficial layer of the tissue, versus excision, where the tissue is actually removed. So if you think of a weed and you just take the head off of the weed will continue to come back. But if you actually remove the roots, it shouldn't come back. So for anyone who's listening, you know, Jen and I both in the beginning had ablation because the doctors didn't know better at that point, or we didn't have the right doctors that could remove it properly, I guess. The gold standard, I don't know if it's proper, and I'm not a doctor or medical professional, but just so people who are listening know the difference and why it comes back with a vengeance, is if you only take the top layer of a weed off, it's going to come back. So just want to give a little tip if anyone's listening and is confused between the 2 different things.
And I don't think until very recently, I didn't even know the difference between ablation and excision. I can only assume that I did have ablation, given how many surgeries I've had to have.
Yeah.
So in March 2016, my 4th surgery, I still have active endometriosis. So I have that removed. He does say that he sees some endometriosis around the bowel, but because he's operating without a bowel specialist, he couldn't go that close to the bowel. He removed what he could, but he didn't really raise it as a concern or say to look out for any symptoms. So I have my surgery, I recover from that, and then I get married and I move to Dubai with my husband. And then we start thinking about trying to get pregnant, and I was told by my surgeon to only give it 6 months. Over this whole period, I've been on the contraceptive pill,
Okay.
as a way of managing my endometriosis symptoms. So I come off the pill and I give it 6 months, and then we try for IVF. And I do 6 IVF cycles over a 2-year period. And unfortunately, they were all unsuccessful. Even though my first 3 cycles, I got good eggs, they all got to blastocyst, which is where they grow them for 5 days, which is a very good indicator that the eggs are good, the embryos are good, but still nothing. So I then look into immunity testing, because it's understood now that people with endometriosis may have issues with your immune system. They don't know whether we have immune system problems to begin with, and that contributes to the endometriosis, or whether it's the other way around. But we undergo very extensive immunity testing in the US. I was treated for that, and until today, unfortunately, it still hasn't worked for us. But about a year after the IVF, we'd started the IVF, I started experiencing extreme bowel problems. So between diarrhea and constipation, extreme pain during my period, with shooting pains. Then as a final, and I just left it. I was busy. I had a lot going on in my life. We were doing IVF. I'd moved countries. My specialist was back in England.
Yeah.
I did email him a few times, but I just thought it's endometriosis. I know what it is. It's fine.
Yeah.
And then the final stage was when I started with rectal bleeding the week before my period, by which point my husband was not happy for me to leave it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Good work.
So that's when I started investigating. Yeah, good work. That's definitely not normal.
You know, it's really interesting that you say that, because I'm very similar to you, and I think a lot of people are in the same boat as us. We're busy and we just keep pressing on with life, and we ignore it because we don't understand. Maybe at that point, like, we don't understand the severity, because no one ever said to me, you can get a bowel obstruction and die. Like, no one ever said it to me. So I ignored it too. I was busy with work, and was like, oh, I'm just going to wait and have a surgery when it's convenient. A surgery is never convenient, especially if your bowel's involved. So what do you do now?
I'd actually decided after my 4th endometriosis surgery, because I naively thought that it was a choice. So I left it. I thought, I don't want to have any more surgery. Then I'm by this point, I'm living in Kuwait. I moved here a year ago. And so I go to the local doctor. They don't really have endometriosis specialists here, but they were very good, and they looked into it very quickly to at least rule out anything else. So I had a colonoscopy very quickly, and they said, we didn't find anything, but if it's endometriosis, we won't necessarily see it on the colonoscopy. So I then decide that I'm going to go back to the UK, and I'm going to go to a different specialist. So I start researching endometriosis specialists, and I found an amazing team in London. And so I went for an MRI scan, and which is something actually I'd never been offered before. It doesn't always show up the endometriosis, but it can give them a good indication at times. And I'd never been offered that scan. Anyway, so the consultant saw on the scan that I had bowel endometriosis. I had, at that point, had gone through 3 layers of my bowel. So I was scheduled for surgery. So that was the August, and I was scheduled for surgery in November. By this point, I'm getting worse and worse. I'm feeling sick on a regular basis. I would just all of a sudden, I might be at work or out, and I would all of a sudden get that terrible cramping. I would just be in the bathroom for hours on end. And by this point, I'd also started a gluten-free diet, dairy-free, sugar-free, everything free. And it would help slightly, but it wasn't taking the pain away. So then I was warned by the surgeon that I may need a bowel resection because of where it was, and it was quite big. It was a 5 centimeter nodule.
Wow.
And he also said that because of the placement of it, he said I would likely need an ileostomy bag. So for a 3-month period, they didn't do recovering, that you would get lean, it would, it's very and I went into surgery in November, not knowing whether they would need to do the full bowel resection and whether I would be waking up with an ileostomy bag. I have to say that was a very, very tough decision for me. I thought I wasn't absolutely certain about having the surgery. I was also scared that I might end up in a worse position than I was already in. And it's daunting to think about having a stoma, and even if it's for a short period of time, it was daunting for sure.
Absolutely.
So
very scary.
Mm-hmm.
You're justified in feeling that way, and please continue.
So I went in for surgery in November, and I had the endometriosis specialist, and I also had a bowel specialist. So I think it's really important for anybody listening that you make sure that if a surgeon is going near your bowel, that you definitely have a specialist. So I woke up from, again, another 5.5-6 hour surgery, and it was the worst case scenario. He said by the time they'd gone in, I almost had a resection, which was cutting out, and unfortunately I did need the ileostomy bag as well. And I also lost both of my fallopian tubes during that surgery as well, because they were both so badly damaged from the endometriosis, and they had fluid in the tube. So actually they said that would have been potentially contributing to the IVF failure as well. So it was a big surgery. I was in hospital for a week. It was really tough. It was really hard. I think anybody listening who has a bag or knows somebody, it definitely isn't straightforward. It affects everything. It affects your hydration levels. You can't eat healthily, especially because you only have it for 3 months. So normally people who have a long-term stoma, you would gradually start introducing healthier foods, but because you have it for 3 months, you have to eat carb, no fruit or vegetables, or very, very little. It was very difficult, and you can't drink water without sugars and salts. So there was a lot to get to grips with. And he said, my surgeon said, when we went in, it was bad. So yeah.
And was he an excision doctor? And did he say, obviously you were still stage 4 at that point, and thank goodness you did this surgery. I mean, the risk, if you hadn't done it, would probably be what happened basically to me. I had almost a full bowel obstruction. From the disease.
horrendous. I know. I actually just felt so lucky that I had the surgery when I did,
Yeah.
especially because I fly back and forth a lot. I was thinking of all the places that I'd been, and if I'd had an obstruction when I was on a flight, or if I was in a country where it would have been very difficult to have surgery. So I was incredibly grateful. And yes, so my surgeon, so it was excision that I had. He works for the NHS in England, and he heads up one of the, I think it's the second biggest endometriosis specialist clinics in Portsmouth. I London, but they have a surgeon, you have a specialist endometriosis nurse. It's I mean, they're phenomenal.
Different level of care when you have someone who understands the disease. And I think I just want to bring up that anyone who is considering surgery or has bowel symptoms, I couldn't agree more that you make sure that you have a bowel specialist in your surgery. And I respect your other doctor too for not touching your bowel, because he didn't know, he or she didn't have the experience in how to do it. That's respectable in my opinion. Is it disappointing because you have to have another surgery? Yes, but I'd rather have someone who knows what they're doing, especially working with that area of your body, which is so important. And was that November of 2019 you had that procedure?
So, and then I had the ileostomy bag for 3 months, and I had that reversed in February. So just 2 months ago.
Wow.
But I think it's also important, I don't want to scare people that just because you have a bowel resection doesn't necessarily mean that you will need an ileostomy bag. I think it very much depends where it is on your bowel, and it's very personal. It's not, you need to discuss that with your doctor. But all I would say is, if anybody is experiencing symptoms, don't leave it. I wish I hadn't left it. If I hadn't left it for 2 years, there are other ways that they can deal with it rather than needing to do a total bowel resection. So had I gone sooner, I wouldn't have needed such invasive surgery. But I didn't know that endometriosis could invade me. It's a really important lesson.
Hence, one of the reasons why I do this podcast is to help bring stories like yours to other people so they can understand how serious. And I did have a bowel resection, and I did not have to have an ileostomy bag because mine was in a different location. So for people who are listening, and if you have to have one, I know it sounds scary, but Jen, I mean, yes, it's tough, but it's not that bad. After 3 months, you're back to normal. Your plumbing's all back to normal. How are you doing now? How are you feeling now?
I feel amazing. I really do. I mean, fatigue is something I still struggle with. I still have endometriosis flare-ups. I had one last week. And I still get annoyed with myself. Why don't I have any energy? Why am I stuck in bed for a whole day? Still 23 years on, I still feel frustrated by it. But I am so much better. I don't have the pain. I don't have any bowel symptoms. And I'm incredibly grateful to the surgeons. They really are amazing. And it really, you're right, Melissa. I mean, looking back now that I've done it and I had the ileostomy bag, it really isn't that bad. And frankly, if it's going to save your life and it's ultimately going to give you a much better quality of life, I would say to somebody, don't hesitate. I mean, it also went very, very quickly. 3 months.
Yes, and I agree with you too, when you said don't put off surgery. I did the very same thing, and I knew I needed surgery. I was in pain for probably a year, ignored it. In May, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. But I was like, I'm really busy at work right now. So I put it off until August. And then I had a bowel obstruction too. And we can't make ourselves feel guilty about that because we didn't know better and we weren't educated that could happen. But I do kick myself because I was like, I could have done this 6 months earlier and things may have been different. But I also think we can't fault ourselves. And I also have a question about IVF. Did you feel like, are there the hormones with IVF kind of do they flare you up? Do you feel like because I've heard some people who do it, it almost sometimes makes endo worse because it's an estrogen dominant disease and you're adding estrogen to your body at that point, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I think the doctors, I've never actually been advised by obviously my IVF doctors or by my gynecologists,
Right.
that it's a proven thing. But I think there are too many women who experience worse symptoms that I think there must be a correlation. I 100% think that doing 6 IVF cycles made my endometriosis far worse. And I think that's really now making me consider whether medically I'm in the right place to do that again, because I think it has to be really carefully monitored as well. I think if I was to do another cycle, I think you just have to be very aware and make sure that you still see your endometriosis specialists and have scans and keep it under close scrutiny, I think. But yeah, I 100% think it made it worse for me.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that because I've never gone through that, but I have talked to other people with endometriosis that had mentioned that. So I wanted to ask you, but I also know people who after excision who did IVF were very successful afterwards as well. But I agree with you, they were still being monitored by their endo doctor, and the doctors were kind of working together to make sure they're not giving you maybe too much at once.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's difficult as you get older because I'm obviously over 35 now. So they have to they quite often have to work you quite hard with the drugs to get the eggs.
Right.
And I think on me. And I know a lot of other women as well have had the similar circumstances.
Well, I'm so happy you're feeling so much better now, and you know, you look good and your energy seems really good. And I know the fatigue is, I still struggle with that too. Sometimes on like a Saturday, I'll be at the grocery store. I'm like, why am I so tired? I can't even like walk through this store right now. I just, the fatigue is a tough one. And I think sometimes we have pain going on in our body and we just don't even know we have it because we have such a high tolerance and it makes us tired. But I don't know. Well, is there anything that you want to tell everyone? I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story, and you've been through an incredible amount. And I know that this is going to be very helpful to so many people, but are there any tips or tricks or advice you want to share with the community while I have you?
I think number one is always listen to your body. You know when something isn't right, and don't let a doctor tell you otherwise. I think if you're not getting the right response from one doctor, then you just need to keep knocking on doors, because there are the specialists out there. They are few and far between, given how many of us suffer from endometriosis, but they are out there, and just don't give up. I think on the fatigue side, that's something that I'm learning quite late in the day, but the acceptance that we may not be able to keep up with our peers who don't suffer from endometriosis, and that's okay. To keep and I've found personally, I still stick to a gluten-free diet. Dairy, I've lessened, but I don't completely cut out. Obviously, that's a very, very personal choice, and it doesn't work for everybody. But I have actually found that not having gluten.
Sorry.
No problem. I have actually found that not having gluten definitely seems to help my pain levels. But again, I think that's very personal. I think you can only find that out by cutting certain things out and seeing if it helps you.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think different things work for different people, but I'm also gluten, dairy free, and it does help me. I'm allergic to dairy, so that one I just can't mess around with, but I don't do the gluten. And when I cut that out, it really did help with just, I felt like my day-to-day, I mean, it still had day-to-day pain, but it helped reduce it. It really did. So
I wonder whether people who suffer from bowel endometriosis, whether there is a correlation there. I mean, I raised it with my surgeon about 8 years ago, whether I should be following a certain diet. And I mean, the medical view is no, there isn't enough evidence. But
yeah.
I think when you try it out yourself, you can notice difference.
Yeah, 100%. Okay.
But
Well, thank you.
No further tips, I'm afraid.
No, those tips
No
were
problem.
very
Thank
helpful.
Thanks very much, Melissa, for
Oh,
having me.
I really appreciate your time and your sharing your story with all of us. It's awesome, and I appreciate it because I know sometimes it's hard to come out and talk about everything you've been through. So I appreciate it.